Welcome to the inaugural event of the Iranian music series. It brings me a great joy to embark on this new chapter as a scholar and teacher of Iranian music at the Herb Alpert School of Music. I am filled with the hope, with the assistance and encouragement of my esteemed colleagues, we can make a meaningful impact within the institution while also contributing to the promotion and preservation of Iranian music. I am deeply grateful for the support extended to me by Dean Strempel and her amazing team, as well as my former professor and lifetime mentor, Professor Danielpour and Professor Krause. Their unconditional support has been invaluable. I also would like to express my appreciation to the Farhang Foundation for their generous support of Iranian music program at UCLA. Their contribution has been instrumental in making this endeavor possible. The art concert was a great excuse for us to gather this exceptional group of influential composers together to discuss the influence of Persian music and instrument on modern composition, and also explore how their individual pieces evolved throughout this musical journey. I would like to introduce our speakers, Professor Krause, Professor Danielpour, Professor Wally, who came from actually Pittsburgh. He teaches at Carnegie Mellon University. We are happy he came here to be with us tonight. And also great...
Used to teach. I retired as of August of 2022.
Well, congratulations.
Professor Emeritus now.
And also Saurabh Purnazari, our fantastic friend and musician. We are happy you're here with us. I know the challenges he dealt last week to be here with us, so we can talk about this later today. The history of music development in Iran dates back thousands of years. Persian music had influenced areas and regions that are considered part of Greater Persia. We can categorize Persian music as Persian classical music, which depends on dastgah system, Persian regional and folk music, religious and ritual music, contemporary music, which can fall into many categories itself. Over the past 70 years, many Iranian composers who had Western classical music training have been influenced by Persian music and instrument in their compositions. Composers from different generations like Mr. Vaziri, Heshmat Sanjari, Hannane, Dehlavi, and many others. There are other composers whose music purely driven from a structure based on Persian classical music. Composers like Parviz Meshkatian, Faramarz Payvar, Hossein Alizadeh, and Saurabh's father, Khosrow Purnazari. In addition, there is a distinct category of composers who, due to the nature of their work, do not necessarily identify themselves as a composer, as their creation may not be in fixed written composition. It is my belief that these composers/performers possess a unique ability to unveil the authentic and pure essence of Persian music through their creative process. Mr. Jalil Shahnaz, Mohammad Reza Shajarian, Kayhan Kalhor, and our wonderful guest, Saurabh Purnazari, I think is one of them. American composer or non-Iranian composer also wrote a lot of pieces influenced by Iranian music. One of my favorite is Henry Cowell's piece, Homage to Iran. Through the history of Western composers have shown a fascination with incorporation of non-Western instrument and musical element into their composition. The exploration of non-Western music tradition and instrument can be attributed to various factors, including cultural exchange, fascination with exoticism, and a desire for new sound and inspirations. The 18th and 19th centuries, as European power expanded their colonialism empire, there was an increased exposure to non-Western culture. Composers like Mozart, Beethoven, and Haydn were influenced by the exotic sound they encountered. Late 19th century and 20th century, this period saw a surge in interest in non-Western cultures, fueled by World's Fair and increased global travels. Composers such as Debussy and Ravel in France were captivated by the gamelan music of Indonesia and integrated its unique scale, rhythm, texture into their works. Debussy's unique approach to the form probably makes him the most important composer in this journey. The exploration of non-Western instrument and technique expand further during the 20th century. Composers like Bela Bartok and Igor Stravinsky incorporated folk music from various non-Western regions, such as Hungary and Russia, into their composition. Overall, the use of non-Western instrument and musical element by Western composer has been driven by a desire to explore new sound, expand musical horizon, and engage in cross-cultural dialogues. It has resulted in a rich and diverse range of composition that showcases the interplay between different musical traditions. So, as I said, and this concert we have on Sunday, it's a great excuse to bring these wonderful composers together, and I would like to start with Professor Krause. He can talk about his previous experience writing for non-Western instrument and getting influence from non-Western music, and also he can talk about his piece for this concert.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's such a pleasure to be here at the beginning of this wonderful new adventure for UCLA. I think you may be the first postdoc in music ever, at least in my memory, and I've been here 33 years. This is amazing. It doesn't happen that often. When I was young, I was a classical guitarist, and I became very interested in Spanish music, and that led me to flamenco. And that was really my first kind of foray into a mysterious world that I loved and was mesmerized by, but had a hard time understanding. That was the first, and I still have that's a lifetime fascination for me. I'm going to make this very, very short because I want to talk about the project we're working on right now. About 12 years ago, I was so fortunate to be adopted by the Armenian musical community in greater Los Angeles, and one thing led to another, so be careful.
Yeah, I know.
It started off with a little song cycle. It started off with a little song cycle, and 2 years later we took over Royce Hall with an orchestra and a choir, so look out. Yeah. So now it's my pleasure to be adopted by my Iranian friends, which is my sole introduction into this new mesmerizing world, which I compare it to flamenco because I don't quite understand it, and yet I'm fascinated by it. It's so complex and so deliciously evolving. I'm just in awe of it, right? So as a non-Easterner, as a non-Iranian, when Shahab asked me to write a piece, that shows an enormous amount of trust in me, which I am honored by. And I think that the best way to show respect to such an amazing tradition is not to try and do it or imitate it. How could I possibly even begin to do that as a non-Iranian composer? So for me, I find that the best way to show my respect is to be myself and find some kind of connection, and that's very intuitive. And you're going to be amazed at the connection that I found. It's a very unlikely one. As a starting point, I took a guitar piece that I wrote about 10 years ago called Dadgad. Dadgad is a typical 6-string detuned guitar tune that blues guitarists use. And I remembered this Led Zeppelin cover of a British rock song called Black Mountainside. It has this very cool riff. And for some reason, I thought of the tambour. Right. And you know, Shahab loaned me a tambour. It's still in my office. I learned to play it a little bit when I was writing the piece.
A lot, actually.
Well, I learned, you know, there are some similarities between guitar and tambour. we both use our fingers, in very interesting ways. What I did was so primitive compared to what Saurabh does, but it was behind closed doors. But I was able to start, riffing around on it, realizing this could really work. And so I took this, as I say, unlikely starting point, a Led Zeppelin cover of a British rock piece, and found, I think, something that to me resonated, and it seems to have worked, right? Yeah. And so my greatest sort of reward was when Saurabh heard it, and he liked it. He thought, this is going to work. So it's for string quartet and dombak and tambour, and a lot of their parts are written out in Western notation, but it's just a suggestion, Right. Although there are some things, as you know, I really want exactly what I wrote, right? Exactly. And I let them know if I need something to be exactly as I wrote, and then if it's something that it's sort of in the ballpark, I let them know. And then there are places where they both have extended solos, where the string quartet is notated very strictly, so I'm controlling the time and the rhythm, but they are listening and responding. And we never know what's going to happen to those sections. But it's a lot of fun. It's a great journey. So I'm a baby here. This is my first, foray into this wonderful new world, and I'm enjoying myself very much. And as I said, it's usually because my friends draw me in. What better way,
No, it's absolutely a beautiful piece, and I have to say it's very challenging. And maybe Saurabh can share a little with us about the challenge he's dealing with now. But I know, in fact, he really loves the piece.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Shahab. It's really my honor to work with you, fantastic musicians. It's a really good opportunity for our music, I think. And about that piece, I'm well known in my country to wrote crazy thing for tambour. And half of the audience like it, and half of the audience just, they thought it's not the tradition, and I changed lots of things. And also we have that challenge in our family. My father is a very well-known Persian tambour composer, and every time that I brought a piece to play with the ensemble, they just blame me, it's too hard, you have to take it easier. And now this is a consequence of that. Yeah, it's really challenging for me because the way that you wrote, it's totally different, but it makes sense and I love it, and it's really interesting. I told Shahab, in some part of that piece I found my father composition. The challenge that he do with the notes, with the complexity. Yeah, it's really, I think it will, that project can open new doors to Persian music, and we can have lots of experiment and share it with the young generation of Iran. They will love it. I know when we release this piece, more than 1,000 tambour players start to challenge and play it.
Yeah.
And
I really, your journey.
Yeah, I really appreciate Shahab and Farhang and UCLA, and I hope we have this team in Iran as soon as we can. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
And share these beautiful and great ideas with Persian musicians and Persian, young generation, which we need to do that, I think. It's a goal of this project.
Thank you. It's very interesting because this group of composers, we all have a different approaches composing and looking at Persian music. Dr. Wally is actually, he can talk about this more himself, but he has at some point in his life he started basically structure his music completely and purely based on Persian music, and he's known for writing music. He's also writing a lot of complex music, which is not easy to play, but it's beautiful, and maybe he can share a little about his background, how he changed his style and approaches writing for Persian music, and also the piece we have in the concert.
Sure. Would be happy to. Well, I actually was brought up with Western music, with European music. At the National Conservatory in Iran, we were not allowed to learn Persian music. This is not a joke. We were punished if we played, you know, my wonderful friend Khosrow Soltani, which many of you know. He was secretly learning santur, so they would punish us, and so we were not. We were brought up with Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and so on, and I went to Austria, and so, you know, way into my midlife, I was not really knowing much about Persian traditional music or Persian music, but from a very, very young age, I was very interested in the regional music, in the folk music. I started collecting folk music, really. And I'm not a musicologist, and I was just writing down what I was hearing. And then when I was in Austria, I was just collecting any tape I got, any, you know, any cassette tape I had. I had this just kind of this obsession with collecting, you know, folk music. And I started really writing music of folk music, just by accident, really. And wrote a piece for voice and piano, and it was, you know, big hit. And I just started, you know, doing more and more. And as I was doing folk music, I started studying folk music. And I realized that, and this is really true, anywhere in Iran you go, is it south, all the way up to Azerbaijan, or all the way down to Khorramshahr, or you go to the east, to Baluchistan, or you go up to Khorasan, the music that you hear, it has this very, very similar cell, very, very similar. It's very similar DNA. As if they are actually children of the same mother. And I thought, well, who is that mother? And I started digging in, and then I realized that that mother is the system of Iranian music, which is dastgah maqam. It's not just dastgah, it's also maqam. One of them is earlier, one of them is much more younger, the dastgah, which is from 19th century. But the other one is much older. It goes back to the 8th century, and that's the maqam. And that's the one that we share with our neighbors, like music of Turkey and the Arabic-speaking civilizations. And so the more I went into this, the more I was just kind of blown away, basically. I got to a point in my life that I got a midlife crisis, seriously. I wanted just to leave everything, go back to Iran and study, you know. But then I thought, okay, I'm going to study tambur. If I am 1,000 of Saurabh, I will be 95 years old. It's time to die. So I couldn't really. And then, how do you live Beethoven? How do you live Debussy? How do you live, you know, Brahms? I love Brahms.
You don't.
I couldn't really. So I decided I invented my own instrument. I can't play an Iranian instrument. So I invented a keyboard. It's called Argo. And Argo, first it was a keyboard, but now it's a software. And you can actually program to do the intervals. And I started learning, you know, the Persian system. And then I just completely broke away from the European system, from the European music system. It's not that European music system is bad. I love music, you know. It's that it was not me anymore. So I started writing music that is purely based on the Iranian system, on the dastgah maqam, or the DM system. So since last 22 years, I have done nothing. Oh, wait, if I get a commission like Pittsburgh Symphony and so on, I have to write something that is much more closer. to, I have to use the system. But for example, the last commission I got from Pittsburgh Symphony, I wrote a piece that is in the mode of Isfahan, is in Dastgah of Isfahan. And they have all microtones. I recorded all the microtones, I sent to the players, and I kind of requested that they play their microtones. Honestly, they nailed it. I can't believe this. US has the best orchestras in the world, just hands down. Right. They nailed it, they just played it, and I was just blown away. And just very quickly, I'm sorry, I went a little bit. This piece that you're hearing is the first piece that I wrote, actually is three pieces called calligraphies. And this is calligraphy number 2. There are 3 of them. And this is the first piece that I started really just kind of exploring the system, the Iranian system. This piece is based on Bayat Zand, also known as Bayat Turk. And it's a soloist. The first violin is a soloist, and it plays actually in the Bayat Zand, and it's very, very close to the Dastgah system. Really, it's not. It's very close, and the trio, the rest of them is like a shadow. They were just accompanying the soloist.
Thank you. Now I would like to ask Dr. Danielpour about his experiencing writing this piece, but also he can talk about. I know he has memories about Iran, and I always tell him that you have it in your blood and it's in your historic memory. So his approaches is also very different. And I would like to ask him to share this with us a little.
Thank you, Shahab. First of all, a great big thank you to Farhang Foundation for making all of this possible. This is a breakthrough moment for UCLA, and it is largely thanks to Farhang and also to the vision of Eileen Strempel and Dean Eileen Strempel and putting all of this together. Thank you so much for allowing this new beginning in our history at UCLA to occur. I am a kind of strange bird when it comes to being a composer and to many people, I'm considered an American composer because I was born in the US. I was brought up with the express intent of my being an American by my Persian parents. My father was born in Hamadan and my mother was born in Tehran, and they both came to the United States when they were fairly young. But very recently, I went and finally broke down and did the 23andMe genealogical test, and I found out that I am 98.7 Persian in my DNA, with only, a 0.3% or 0.7% from the Middle Eastern area around what is now Israel and Syria and Lebanon. So, I have no European blood, even though I have been born and raised with European music, and I've spent my life, teaching, coming from a European classical tradition. I'm still, as my blood shows and as Shahab attests, I'm almost like, the equivalent of what do they say with ivory snow, 99 and 44, 100% pure. I'm that for being an Iranian, I suppose. And what's interesting is that I did live in Iran as a child in 1963. And this is right around the time when a child is 7, 8 years old, that he starts to remember things. Fortunately, I have a fairly decent memory. And I mean, I even remember the very day that I met Saurabh and Shahab. It was on March 22nd, 2012 in Orange County. And that was a momentous day because we were both sharing a concert that day.
Thanks to Farhang Foundation.
Thanks also to the Farhang Foundation. Yes, indeed. And I remember the day I met you too. But you know, it's interesting to me that when I started, and I started rather late in my career, being interested in Persian music and Persian culture, it largely came through the poetry. I remember in 2001, I received a commission from the New York Philharmonic with Yo-Yo Ma to write a second cello concerto, and I asked Kayhan Kalhor if he would actually play an in the hall, off stage as it were, kemanche part, and the kemanche is in many ways like an ancestor of the cello. And my idea on a personal level was that I wanted to have a conversation with my father nearly 30 years after he had passed away, but in music, you see. And so this piece opened up a whole world for me. And I started to study Persian poetry, and I had a number of family members who were encouraging me. Also, I spoke a great deal while Sir Shahab was studying with me. I was learning from him about Persian poetry and also a bit about Persian music. But it was through the poetry that I began to understand something about this, about what you refer to as this historical memory. It almost awakened something in my heart and soul. And all of a sudden, I began to remember things I'd heard at the age of 7. I began to remember actual music that I had heard. And, you know, like a good secretary, I would write these things down that I would remember. And I would think, oh, I can use that. Oh, I can use that too. And of course, after a while, I had a collection of ideas, you see. The tricky part in all of this is that when a composer like myself, who was a Western composer, or Ian Krause, for instance, who is a thoroughly Western composer, but who has been fascinated, Ian is like an American Bartók. You know, he collects from different cultures, and he finds a way to take them all and make them subsumed into his own language. But for me, one of the things that I find interesting, challenging, and provocative is that in Persian music, there is not a harmonic language per se, but there's a very sophisticated rhythmic and melodic language. And so, you know, to reconcile the idea of a composer who thinks in terms of harmony, but has to also incorporate something of a melodic and rhythmic language is interesting. And I have written about a dozen works since 2001 in these 22 years that have been highly influenced by the Persian aesthetic, and that would include I've actually set a number of pieces to set a number of poems, Persian poems, in the original Farsi to music, which has been an amazing experience. But in each instance, there's this negotiation that has to happen between my language harmonically and the language that I've inherited from my ancestors. And in this way, it's been an extraordinary experience. One thing I wanted to also say, just about the value of what is going on here. I mean, I've written a piece that is a little 11-minute piece, which is almost, it's in effect an elegy for the innocent people in Iran who have been caught in this political firestorm and who have in a way been innocently mistreated. But the work itself is, there's not much I want to say about it, because I'd rather let the work speak for itself if it's going to be of any value. But what I would say is that one of the great values here in what Shahab is going to do for us in the time ahead, and we are, by the way, so grateful to have Saurabh Paranj with us, because, I mean, this is, when I heard him the first time, I remember saying to someone, it's like I'm hearing the Persian version of Jimi Hendrix or of Heifetz, you know. And I mean, the thing is, we don't think of Iranian musicians having a Heifetz, but you've got one sitting in front of you now. And he is daring, and he is bold, and he is fearless in a way that many Persian musicians, many of your compatriots, don't have that fearlessness that you have. You've been blessed by God in this way. But for me, what is so valuable is that we as Western composers who teach in a music school are funneling always in and out with cognitive information. You know, this is all, the universities are always about thinking. But one of the wonderful things about an improvisatory tradition is that it is driven not just by structures, melodic, rhythmic, harmonic structures, but also by intuition. There are no courses for training intuition per se, you know, but I mean, I and my dear friend, Professor Krause, have worked very hard at developing a kind of arena for students to cultivate their own intuition. But this music allows for us to have a different perspective, to consider a different way of thinking about music, which is not just thought-driven, but also intuitively driven. My belief, you know, what I say to the esteemed musicologists and ethnomusicologists in our school is, it has to be heard and experienced to be real. We can talk about music until we are blue in the face. If we don't experience it, it's not alive. Talking about it brings us, yes, into the doorway of living with it in a more fully blown way. But it has to be heard and experienced. And so this performance tradition, which came for years from an oral tradition and then became codified, is something that we all can learn so much from.
May I jump in for a moment? Speaking of learning from these guys, I share that same sentiment. I learn more from them than they learn. I don't feel like the teacher when you play. No, I'm serious.
No, he's modest.
You know what? I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned from both of them. When Shahab plays, it's like the drum is speaking. I feel like I'm having a conversation. And I've never felt that way with any percussion instrument before, or performer before. It's just amazing. They were at my house for my birthday, and they were kind enough to
March 2nd.
something like that. Yeah,
That was the day. That was the day you had your birthday.
That wasn't my birthday, but that was the day.
That was the day.
This guy's a phenomenal memory for dates. They were there, and they were kind enough to play for me. And Saurabh, when the two of them improvise on the occasions I've seen, Saurabh always goes first. And Shahab just politely waits for a time, for the right time. And sometimes that might be 8 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But on this particular occasion, Saurabh began, and he was playing pianissimo for the first 4 or 5 minutes. And I don't think he hardly ever plucked with his right hand. It was almost all the left hand. And there was such intensity at such a quiet dynamic. I've never heard anything like that before. I'll never forget it. I mean, it's like ingrained in my brain. I mean, it was just amazing.
Thank you so much.
I mean, we were all of us there in my living room were literally holding our breath. You know, I was probably like this, you know, trying to get inside the instrument, but I've never heard anything like that before. So that's just two examples of things that I learned, and that kind of synergy is something that I hope never to lose as a composer. I always want to feel like I'm a student, not a master. That's deadly. You know?
It's very interesting, actually, you mentioned that, because last year we had a residency here, and we have an amazing guitarist here. So since I grew up with Saurabh, I always use his, you know, technique as much as I can in my composition. So I wrote this exactly the moment just using the left hand for the piece. And then this amazing guitarist, who is very well known, he was complaining for 10 minutes that, what is this? I can't play this. So
I was there.
So I think it's very important to have someone like Saurabh doing this kind of thing, and it's a great exposure.
I know some guitarists who would love to do it, by the way. That was the wrong one.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention something about Shahab, that this is a story that I have not shared with anybody publicly. And I know that you won't mind my sharing this with you, because I think it's important. You know, when I was living in New York, and I lived there for 35 years, I was the first stop for a number of Iranian expatriate musicians. They would come to me and they would say, countless, I can't count them, there were so many. They would come to me and they would say, it's my dream to be a composer, or it's my dream to be a Western classical pianist. What do I do? And of course, when the composers would come to me, I would say to them, completely blank-faced, your life is going to be hell for the next 5 years. It's going to be like a boot camp if you study with me that will last a number of years, and there'll be days that you will hate me, not because I'll be unkind, but because the amount of work and assimilation of a Western musical tradition you will have to incorporate will be brutal. It will be punishing. And so I would say this to, and I mean, you know this because I've told you this, so I would say this to a number of these young, aspiring Persian musicians who wanted to be Western classical musicians, and they would look at me with this glazed look in their eyes and turn away, and they'd say, I'll get back to you. And of course, I would never hear from them again. When Shahab came to me shortly after that premiere, I had a work at Orange County that was an oratorio of about an hour long that was written in 5 languages with a chorus and a soprano soloist. It was in Hebrew, Arabic, Farsi, Aramaic, and English. And then Shahab and Saurabh played an extraordinary first half of the concert. So Shahab came to me a number of months later. I believe he came to me in the second week of October 2012. And he said, I'm ready to study with you. And I said, do you have any idea how incredibly tough this is going to be? You're not going to sleep some nights. You're going to be overwhelmed with work. You won't be able to be a rock star with your Shams ensemble the way you've been with all these adoring fans. I said, those days are going to be over for a while, and you will have to really buckle down. And he didn't blink. And he looked straight at me fearlessly, and he said, tell me what I need to do. I'm here. I will do it. And he hasn't stopped since. It's amazing to see what you have managed to do in these 11 years. It's extraordinary. And we're also proud of you here at our school.
Thank you, Master. Thank you. Thank you first. It's actually interesting because you mentioned earlier about the event that we have in Iran. You know, holding event these days outside of Iran, it's inevitable actually to not thinking and relating to what's happening there. Like 2 nights ago and last night, they executed 3 innocent people. And of course, this event also we have pieces and music that is related to Iranian people and what's happening there. I have a piece for a string quartet, and the first movement is called Chamari. Chamari is a funeral march in west part of Iran for Sorna and Dohol. So I actually composed for a string quartet. So I think we all agree we can dedicate this concert to Iranian people and what's happening to Iran. So also in the program we have two parts that is pure improvisation of Saurabh, me, and Pejman Haddadi, who is also teaching here at school, and we are happy to include him in this concert. He's an amazing percussionist with amazing background. So I want Saurabh to talk about a little about his improvisation and this section that we have together.
First of all, I want to thank you, Maestro. It's really an honor to play your piece, and I really, study. I learn a lot from both of you guys, and thank you. Thank you for all nice
We've
words.
learned a lot from you, too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we will play two-part improvisation. In first part 20 minutes and second part 20 minutes.
Yes.
In first part we play tambour music, and it's more improvisation. It's like 90% improvisation, and I'm so happy to play with Shahab and Mr. Haddadi. Both of them are really good percussionists, and I think this is a very good combination, because it's really hard to play with one percussionist in Iran for me, because it's really hard to find the same, language with them. But both of them are really artists, and I'm really happy to play with them. I think we have a nice moment in that part. And in second part, we play a composition of me, which I composed, I think, last year for Kemanche, and also it has some improvisation part include, and but it's based on Persian classical music, very pure, and I think we need this part in this kind of concerts, when you compose, we have to have some improvisation part, because the root of Persian music is improvisation. And also I hope for next time we have a very good lady singer,
Right.
yeah, to join us, because it's it's the base of Persian music of us, and we have to have a very good lady singer next time. We have to work with ladies, and I want to announce that I will not compose for any man anymore. Yeah, for sure.
There's a reason he's saying that.
Yeah, for sure. I will compose just for ladies until they can sing freely in Iran.
Right. Bravo. Bravo.
Shahab,
Please.
I just want to say a few words. I want to thank the Farhang Foundation and also the School of Music of UCLA, especially our esteemed colleagues, Richard and Ian, and also Shahab, and of course Saurabh. What you have started, it will not have only impact in local, it will have a national and an international impact. I have been in this business, and I know, I have worked in many different, including in Europe. There is nothing like this, nothing. Outside of Iran, nothing. United States, in national, there's nothing. You don't have a minor in Persian music. You do not tell me a university in the United States that has a minor in Persian music. Zero. Not even in Europe. So I think this is an amazing undertaking. And I really wanted to thank all of you, especially Shahab, that has been really instrumental in this, and also Farhang Foundation. This is an amazing work, and please keep doing this. Will have a national and international impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Since Saurabh mentioned about how he wants to, how actually decided to not perform unless there is a female singer. First piece we have in the program, it's actually inspired from Zurkhane tradition, which is a martial art, goes back to 1,000 years in Iran, but it was a very masculine tradition and exercise. So what I did with this piece, actually, I wrote it for zarb, be like a bigger goblet drum and soprano, and we have two amazing dancers from UCLA. I dedicated this piece to Iranian women who are fighting every day for their right. And I think now they are, because that tradition, that martial art was actually, they started doing this underground after invasion of Arabs. So they couldn't practice their, ritual. So they were doing this underground, but it was mostly for the men. So now I think what's happening in Iran, it's women that they're fighting for their rights. And I think this was a great occasion that I wrote this piece, and they are representing, it's a combination of that martial art, that music also. Our wonderful colleagues, Misha Rice, is singing. So it's kind of, it represent, they are the one that we can rely on them, and they are making the revolution. Not the revolution that, drastic changes, but the one that we are hoping culturally change many things in Iran. And I think this is something that is actually impacting the world. So this is a very important thing we have to consider in all the events and program we do, and thanks to Saurabh actually thinking that way, because it's, when you say this, it's actually, you have to pay the price. When you say, I'm not going to compose for men until, there is a female composer, female singer singing my pieces, that means you are limiting a lot of things. So thanks to you. And so I think this was a great discussion, so we can end here. So if there's anything you guys wanted to share, otherwise, thanks to you.
Do you have any questions from the audience?
Yes.
Do you have any questions?
Yes, thanks.
We're good.
Good. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Sunday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.